Some discoveries are so big they threaten to change everything we know of human history. Today I'll be exploring strange artifacts that shouldn't exist, mummified body parts that could be from aliens, and an undefined human ancestor that has the experts stumped. The search for alien DNA. It wasn't very long ago that Zecharia Sitchin insisted a dead Sumerian woman who had been buried for 4,500 years was an alien. Zecharia, one of the weirdest fringe celebrities of the archaeology world, said he was willing to stake everything he had ever written on one DNA test. Just test the Sumerian woman and prove that her DNA was mixed with alien DNA. Zecharia said it would be all the proof anyone would ever need that the earliest humans were hybrids with extraterrestrials. Zecharia died in 2010. The same year he insisted the woman needed to be DNA tested. He was the author of many controversial books. Books such as The Wars of Gods and Men, The 12th Planet, and the Anunnaki Chronicles. He started talking about his theories in the 1970s. Across all of his books, Zecharia detailed the journey of aliens from the planet Nibiru to Earth, where they used a piece of themselves to create humans as slaves. The main idea was, and still is in many circles, that early pharaohs and kings were mostly pure-blooded aliens, but with a bit of human DNA. Then, as the years went on, they lost their divine alien blood and became more human. The aliens were, according to Zecharia, the Anunnaki gods worshipped by the Sumerians. They were also the Nephilim that the Bible tells us about. Zechariah's ideas inspired other researchers to write their own books, like famous author Eric von Daniken and others who have been scorned by the scientific community. Now let's take a look at the woman Zecharia was so desperate to have biologically analyzed. She was a queen, her bones discovered in Iraq in the 1920s, around the same time that Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered in Egypt. Her name was Queen Puabi. Scientists from London's Natural History Museum confirmed Puabi was 40 years old when she died. She likely ruled in the first dynasty of Ur as one of the mightiest of all ancient queens. She lived 2,500 years before Cleopatra. Zecharia didn't think Puabi was merely a queen. He believed she was a nin, a Sumerian term for goddess. He was convinced at 90 years old that if scientists would just check her DNA, they would prove that Puabi was related to extraterrestrial beings from Nibiru. Are you thinking I'm crazy for even talking about this right now? Or are you intrigued? Either way, there's a lot that Zecharia said which makes sense. For example, his interpretation of the story of Adam and Eve. You likely know that Adam and Eve's story has been told for thousands of years by hundreds of civilizations. Their names change and their stories differ a little, but there is always an origin myth about the first man and first woman. And almost always the Adam and Eve characters are involved in some kind of forbidden fruit dangling from a tree of eternal life. Zecharia believed there is a perfectly scientific explanation for this. He saw the Adam and Eve myth as a reference to aliens creating the first humans. That forbidden fruit that got Eve kicked out of the garden, Zecharia thought it was a piece of the alien genome that they didn't want humans to have. Perhaps it was immortality, maybe superior wisdom or perfect health. Whatever it was, the Anunnaki kept it from us. Being separated from the forbidden fruit has prevented humans from rising above our monkey nature. Queen Puabi was never found to have alien DNA. But then again, would scientists even tell the public if they did find proof of Anunnaki meddling? Puabi's skeleton isn't the first of ancient remains that people have claimed to be alien. But we'll get into that. And now for number 10, but first it's shout-out time. I wanted to give a big thank you to Stephen Hutchings 4946 and Kevin Jones 8745 for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about unexpected discoveries that could change history. A Christian Chalice is rewriting history. In Britain, archaeologists found something that is awfully similar to the Holy Grail. They discovered an ancient Christian chalice in the ruins of a Roman fort. It wasn't used by Christ, but is still seriously old. The 1400-year-old cup is rewriting religious history in the UK. It's the oldest chalice ever discovered in Britain, but it was found in pieces. Its shards buried underneath a church that was built in the 6th century AD near Hexham. The director of excavation excavations, Dr. Andrew Bertley, said the small pieces were inscribed with Christian symbols. Each little piece is covered in drawings of crosses, angels, and other sigils of early Christian worship. But who made the chalice, and why is it such a big deal? It's just a cup, isn't it? In the 6th century, the Romans were already gone. They had abandoned their fortress on the outskirts of Hadrian's Wall. But finding the cup proved not everybody left. The settlement continued to thrive after the collapse of Rome as a stronghold for Christians. Andrew went on to say that his scientists are used to finding Roman artifacts in a ruined fort. They've discovered boxing gloves, shoes, and boots, but nothing like this. One of the symbols drawn onto the cup is a boat with a mast shaped like a cross. Andrew thinks it was meant to symbolize the church as a vessel bringing Christians to their eternal afterlife in heaven. Scientists have always struggled to understand the spread of Christianity in Europe as the Roman Empire crumbled. Technically, the chalice was made during the Dark Ages, the most mysterious era of the past 2,000 years. There were few records kept during that time. Small discoveries like the Holy Chalice are all archaeologists have to understand what happened all those years ago. Did Chinese culture originate in Egypt? Did you know that pasta, Italy's most famous national dish, was brought from China by Marco Polo? Pasta, the one thing that's more synonymous with Italy than talking with their hands, was taken from another civilization centuries ago. And what's the deal with Caesar salad? It's named Caesar as if it has anything to do with Rome, when the salad began in North America. I wanted to start with food because I'm about to get into a wild theory. According to a new study headed by a geochemist named Sun Weidong, Chinese civilization began in ancient Egypt. The Italians stole pasta from China, but China stole their whole culture from the Egyptians. How in the world could anyone come to this conclusion? There aren't any great walls in Egypt. The gods are totally different between the two cultures. The architecture isn't even remotely similar. Sun Weidong began formulating his theory nearly 20 years ago while studying Chinese bronzes from 1400 BC. During his research, Sun noticed a particular set of relics that share a chemical similarity with metals used in Egypt. The Yin-Shang bronzes don't look Egyptian, but their chemical composition is more similar to Egyptian artifacts than other Chinese artifacts. Sun Weidong has given two explanations for this. He believes the bronzeware could have been cast near Egypt and then shipped to China on a boat. Either that or something else that's truly shocking. Sun claims the other possibility is that a group of people from Egypt emigrated to China carrying bronze and tin ores. The Yin-Shang bronzes are the only artifacts that have been found made from the same metal used by Egyptians. The idea is that the group who emigrated did so with only a small amount of ore and used it to create these artifacts. Sun has gone a step further, claiming the mysterious emigrants were the ancestors of modern Chinese people. 3,400 years ago, Egyptians arrived in China, and their descendants are still there. It's a theory that has some people furious. Chinese archaeologists have been disputing Sun's claims because, if true, it would completely rewrite Chinese history. The mummy with only 3 fingers. Let's jump back to archaeological remains that could be alien. In a Peruvian tunnel, its entrance found hidden in the desert, a mummified hand was uncovered. At first glance, it looks fake. The mummified hand only has 3 fingers on it, each finger 8 inches long. Take a look at your hand for a second. Notice that none of your fingers are 8 inches long. Also notice that you have 4 fingers and a thumb. This mysterious hand clearly doesn't belong to a human, but it doesn't appear to be fake either. The strange artifact was studied by a physician in Cusco who confirmed it to be made from skin and bone. But where did it come from, really? What's the deal with the tunnel? This is where things get a little suspicious. The bizarre, potentially extraterrestrial hand was given to researcher Brienne Forster, who operates hidden Inca tours. The person who originally found the hand is not the most reliable source. They were supposedly wandering in the southern desert of Peru in 2016 when they found the entrance to a tunnel. Inside the tunnel, they found 2 sarcophagi containing random body parts. This hand was among them. After the hand was given to Brian, he took it to a physician in Cusco who did not want to be named. This is the image courtesy of Hidden Inca Tours, taken by the physician when he did x-rays, compared to a human hand. As you can tell, they are obviously way different. The freaky hand has 6 bones in each finger and no opposable thumb. It looks exactly like what you'd imagine a thumbless alien hand to look like. There are creatures on this planet with 3 fingers, but they're typically birds and reptiles. Although then again, the rhinoceros only has 3 fingers as well. The mummified hand discovered in Peru is not from any known animal. It's a total anomaly. But is it real? Or is Brian Forster making things up to drum up more business? Let me know what you think in the comments. The Queen of Sheba. 12 years ago, a British excavation struck gold. They made a discovery with the potential to change history. But now, over a decade later, it's been forgotten. 3,000 years before today, the great Queen of Sheba arrived in Jerusalem with piles of gold to give as a gift to the biblical King Solomon. Sheba was the ruler of a vast and extremely wealthy kingdom that stretched across Ethiopia and Yemen. However, nobody knows if she was real or just a legend. She has the mystique of Cleopatra with none of the historical references. Most of what's known about the Queen of Sheba comes from biblical texts. Then came Louise Schofield, a former British Museum curator. She organized an excavation in northern Ethiopia, hoping to find proof that the Queen of Sheba was real. And she found it. Though not in the form of bones or treasure, Louise uncovered a battlefield, a temple, and a gold mine. A literal gold mine, that is. The first clue came when researchers found an enormous stone stele 20 feet tall and carved with a sun and crescent moon. These were the signs of the land of Sheba. The main deity of the Sheba people was the moon god Almaka. Whereas places like Egypt and Rome gave praise mostly to the sun, Sheba hailed the moon. Louise crawled underneath the stone even after locals warned her that there was a giant cobra living underneath it. She didn't find a cobra, but did spot an inscription written in ancient Sabaean. It was obvious from this point that the ruins of Sheba are spread across northern Ethiopia, forgotten for millennia. Near the broken stele, Louise found shattered columns and intricately carved stone channels in the ruin of what looked like a humongous temple. She supposed the temple was dedicated to the moon god sometime in the 8th century BC. Near the temple was the battlefield, where Louise excavated a series of bones before moving on to a mysterious shaft buried 4 feet deep in a hill. Louise identified the shaft as being an entrance to an ancient mine and possibly the source of Queen Sheba's incredible wealth. There's no gold left now. Nothing remains except an old skull embedded in the entrance of the shaft and chiseled with indecipherable Sabaean writing. Still, Ethiopians spend their days panning for gold in the nearby river because once in a while, a little trickle of that forgotten wealth slips out. What do all these discoveries mean, though? They seem to confirm that Sheba, sometimes spelled Saba, was a legitimate empire. It was powerful and rich enough to trade with Jerusalem and Rome. Their most famous queen is immortalized in both the Bible and the Quran. In each holy book, the Queen of Sheba had wealth that could rival any king of the world. Louise thinks it's possible the gold mine she found was the source of that wealth. The kingdom may have been built directly on one of the richest gold veins ever found. Unfortunately, there hasn't been any additional progress made in Louise's investigation in the last decade. The northern area of Ethiopia became dangerous to explore, leading to a decline in archaeological research. But the truth is still out there. It was Queen Sheba's son, Menelik, whose descendants became the first kings of Abyssinia. Religion's weird psychedelic origin. 50,000 years ago, Neanderthals were getting funky with psychoactive plants, specifically plants like yarrow and chamomile. But just how far back does the human psychedelic experience go? Scientists think mind-altering plants and fungi may have shaped human history. Terence McKenna was the scientist who famously introduced the stoned ape theory to the world. He proposed that millions of years ago, early human ancestors started eating mushrooms that contained the psychedelic ingredient psilocybin. With these mushrooms part of the new diet, their hallucinogenic properties helped early humans develop language, creativity, and religious insight. In 1979, Harvard ethnobotanist Richard Evans Schultz wrote that there are few areas around the world that lack at least one powerful hallucinogen. In other words, wherever early humans were in the world, they had access to substances that they could trip out on. Richard's study surrounding early humans and hallucinogens was published with another scientist whose name you might recognize, Albert Hofmann. He was the guy who discovered LSD. Did you know LSD was first synthesized using ergot, a fungus used to brew an ancient Greek drink? Throughout all of human history, people have been indulging in psychedelics. Tassil-in Hajer National Park in the Sahara Desert of Algeria is one of the most incredible places you'll ever see. Amidst the sand dunes are rocky outcrops covered in bizarre frescoes dating back to 8000 BC. Some of the figures in the frescoes have been interpreted as aliens, suggesting alien contact. But there's one figure here that's pertinent to today's topic. He's a wizard priest with the head of a bee who has dozens of mushrooms sprouting from his body. Experts think this figure may have been a shaman who fed his people magic mushrooms. I could give you hundreds of examples. Psychoactive plants were used among the Bwiti and Bantu of southern Africa. Caves in Ethiopia have been found with bowls that tested positive for cannabis residue. In Egypt, the powerful hallucinogen dimethyltryptamine, aka DMT, was found being ingested 5,700 years ago. I could go on and on with examples from across the Pacific, in a cave in Thailand, in India, China, and the Americas as well. The point is that everywhere you look, ingesting hallucinogenic drugs had a major impact on early human society. Scientists are starting to seriously suspect that natural hallucinogens were responsible for an explosion of creativity, one that led to the creation of the first religions. What are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments. First ever Philistine cemetery discovered. In 2016, a Philistine cemetery was discovered. Could this cemetery hold the bones of Goliath, the arch-nemesis of David in the Bible? Could this be proof of giants and biblical miracles, or is it nothing but old bones? This was the first time a Philistine cemetery was ever discovered, making it a big deal for archaeologists and biblical scholars. The cemetery is 3,000 years old, dating to the earliest days of the Old Testament. It's something historians have been hoping to find for decades. Little is known about the Philistines of the Bible, other than that they sent forth Goliath to pummel young David. And I think we all know how that story ended. In the books of Samuel, Goliath, a literal giant, is taken down by a slingshot. But were there really giants in ancient Israel? The cemetery was found in Ashkelon, a place that's been explored for the last 30 years by scientists. Daniel Master from Wheaton College said the cemetery should reveal more about the Philistines than anyone has ever known before. For example, what kind of houses they built, what food they ate, and who they traded with, and also what they were like as human beings. Archaeologists have already found a handful of skeletons, many buried with weapons or jewelry, some buried with jugs of perfumed oil. However, no giants. Not a single oversized human skull to suggest the Philistines were descendants of Nephilim. But all hope isn't lost. Ashkelon was one of 5 cities ruled by the Philistines, a popular port on the Mediterranean up until the days of the Crusades. There's still 4 other cities and a lot more places where scientists may one day find the bones of Goliath. Unknown human species hidden deep in DNA. Scientists may have identified an entirely new missing link that could change the evolutionary history of human beings. Homo sapiens might have a new cousin. In the DNA of modern Melanesians, a group of people who live in the South Pacific, scientists have found some peculiar strands of DNA. The DNA appears to be from a species of human that's never been identified before. Do you remember earlier how I said Zecharia Sitchin believed somewhere deep in human DNA are the remains of the Anunnaki? If he were alive now, he would be loving this new research. Up until recently, scientists were in agreement that Homo sapiens lived alongside Neanderthals tens of thousands of years ago. There were 2 ancient human species that grew up in the same neighborhood. Then one moved away into extinction, leaving humans alone on the planet. This changed in 2010 in a profound way. A couple of bones discovered in Siberia revealed that there was a 3rd species known as Denisovans. This was hardly more than a decade ago. Suddenly the human family tree was looking a lot more complicated. There were Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans all living at the same time. Now scientists have found a 4th member of the family. Ryan Bollender from the University of Texas said, "We are missing a population." Ryan and his team have been trying to pinpoint the percentages of extinct hominid DNA still carried by modern humans. During the research, the team found a lot of discrepancies. They confirmed that humans did mingle with Neanderthals and Denisovans. There's something else that's not making sense. There is another species altogether that was mingling with humans between 100,000 and 60,000 years ago. Were they aliens? Was Zecharia correct in his assumption? Perhaps that missing link is from planet Nibiru. Neanderthals left a little bit of themselves inside humans before they went extinct. Interspecies breeding left human beings with slivers of Neanderthal DNA in our genomes. And it's not good news. In fact, it's awful news. Researchers recently found that people with a higher percentage of Neanderthal DNA still inside of them face certain health risks. People more closely related to Neanderthals are more likely to be depressed, have heart attacks, and suffer skin disorders. And get this, trust me when I say you're going to be seriously disturbed. A separate study that was just published found evidence that the human papilloma virus, also called HPV, was transmitted to Homo sapiens when our ancestors hooked up with Neanderthals and Denisovans. By the way, most people carry between 1.4 and 4% Neanderthal DNA, in case you were wondering. The Melanesians, though, people from places like Vanuatu, Fiji, the Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea, also have between 1 and 6% Denisovan DNA. Plus, they have DNA from a third unknown hominid. It's the third hominid with the potential to change history forever. The bad reputation of Richard III. Sometimes history is changed on purpose through hard work and determination. Following the unusual discovery of a king's bones underneath a parking lot, historians began rehabilitating the dead ruler's terrible reputation. King Richard III was the last English monarch to fight amongst his men in battle and die for it. He ruled for only 2 years, from 1483 until 1485. He was the last of the House of York, the last king of the Plantagenet line. He was a lot of lasts. He's also been viewed as a villain for the last 5 centuries. What did Richard do that was so villainous? He stole the throne from his young nephews after his brother died. He may also have killed that brother. Historian Thomas More wrote that King Richard was twisted and deformed, with his back crooked and his left shoulder higher than his right. Other historians during Tudor England also described King Richard as looking like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Philippa Langley is a member of a society you likely haven't heard of before. She belongs to the Richard III Society, a group dedicated to getting rid of the king's bad reputation. Philippa spent years raising enough funds to excavate a parking lot in Leicester, England, where she thought the king might be buried. Sure enough, she was right. But wait a second, why was an English king buried under a parking lot? And why did it take Philippa to raise money to dig him out of there? Let's go back to his death on August 22, 1485. At the Battle of Bosworth, Richard led a cavalry unit against Henry Tudor in an attempt to end the Wars of the Roses. It didn't go the way Richard had planned. He was cut down by Henry's supporters. An analysis of Richard's skeleton has shown that he lost his helmet at some point during the battle. He was likely hit in the skull with a halberd. A halberd is a two-handed polearm with an axe blade and a spike on a long shaft. So, not the best way to go out. After the battle, he was dragged to Greyfriars, the base for the Order of the Franciscans in Leicester. Richard was so despised that he was buried in a crude grave and forgotten. After the friary was dissolved in 1538, it was demolished and his tomb was lost. But was never truly lost. Philippa knew, as did other historians, that the ruins of Greyfriars were likely underneath the parking lot. Philippa's determination led to finding his body in September 2012. She hopes that now, having his actual skeleton around, scientists can confirm he didn't look like a hunchback and wasn't the villain history made him out to be. I guess we'll have to wait and see what they find out. Ron Wyatt, the man who found the Ark of the Covenant. In the 1980s, a man named Ron said that he discovered the Ark of the Covenant and gazed upon it with his own eyes. He didn't even melt into goo or anything. But when he tried to bring the Ark out of the subterranean hole where it was hiding, a quartet of angels descended from heaven and stopped him from doing so. When Ron tried to release the pictures he had taken of the Ark, divine intervention erased them. It's a weird story, but one that's believable if you already believe in divine interventions. Ron Wyatt was an amateur researcher with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. In 1982, he conducted an excavation underneath the exact spot where Jesus was crucified in the old city of Jerusalem. First, Ron discovered the remnants of an old Christian church built in the 1st century AD. As he continued to dig, he found strange holes cut out of the stone. The holes looked kind of like post holes, like holes on a golf course. They would have been used by the Romans to hold the giant wooden crosses for crucifixion. It was further proof that Ron was in the exact spot where Jesus had died. Underneath the holes, Ron found a crack in the bedrock. Underneath the crack, he uncovered a series of caves, and within those caves he found, sitting lonely and bright in its holy glory, the Ark of the Covenant. You might be wondering why you've never heard this story before. It's because none of what Ron claimed he found has ever been verified. Nobody's ever found the post holes that Ron found, nor the caves that he discovered. Ron said inside the cavern, right above the ark, was a crack in the rock with some dried black gunk on it. This was the blood of Christ, he said, from when the centurion stuck his spear into Jesus' side. In the end, Ron was foiled by angels. They told Ron that it wasn't time yet for the world to learn of his discovery. So the caves were sealed and the ark is still there waiting for the right time. The thing about Ron is that he made a lot of discoveries during his life. He found more than 100 biblical-related wonders from Noah's Anchor to the Tower of Babel. Ron found Noah's tomb and the grave of his wife. Ron also claimed that he took samples from Jesus Christ's blood in the caves beneath the Old City. Tests then showed that Jesus had 24 chromosomes instead of 46. Even creationists don't believe Ron's stories. Leaders from the Seventh-day Adventist Church have dismissed everything he said as fantasy. But what if he was telling the truth? If the Bible is real and everything in it happened, it isn't far-fetched to think Ron had his discoveries foiled by a few angels. Ron really did go on all those expeditions. He was working as a nurse anesthetist in a Tennessee hospital in the 1960s. He saw a picture of the Durapina site where Noah's Ark supposedly landed in a Life magazine. After that, Ron quit his job. From 1977 until he died in 1999, he made over 100 trips to the Middle East. He spent 20 years trying to prove everything he could from the Old and New Testaments. You can still see his work at the Wyatt Archaeological Museum in Cornersville, Tennessee. Do you believe Ron's story? Planet X. Astronomers may have just narrowed down the location of Zecharia Sitchin's Nibiru, the homeworld of the Anunnaki. Researchers have found where a real alien planet might be hiding at the edge of the solar system. Some call it Nibiru, some call it Planet X or Planet 9. But no matter what you call it, everyone's talking about the same celestial body beyond Neptune in the Great Abyss, the potential home of the aliens who seeded Earth. But then again, maybe not. Nibiru is a bit of an enigma, but so is our solar system. Here's something to impress your friends with. It's true that Pluto was demoted from being a real planet in 2006 by the International Astronomical Union. But outside of the 8 official planets, there are 5 dwarf planets in our solar system. Pluto is one of them, but there's also Ceres, Makemake, Eris, and Haumea. However, if you classify satellites or moons as planets, the number goes up to over 150. And there could be many more. One of them is beyond Neptune, hiding inside the Oort cloud, which is a large cloudy debris field at the edge of the solar system. It stretches about 9.3 trillion miles, give or take, giving the Milky Way a diameter of around 3 light-years. But what about Nibiru? Scientists from the Panoramic Survey Telescope and Rapid Response System based in Hawaii have already dismissed about 78% of the possible places that Nibiru could be hiding. The team has narrowed down the area where the planet could be, but for now, it's still a myth. Even so, the team at the observatory put forth some possible measurements. They think Nibiru might be the 5th biggest object in the solar system, its mass between that of Earth and Uranus. It's crazy to think that a planet almost 7 times bigger than Earth is playing such a solid game of hide and seek. The mystifying Nanjing Belt. The Nanjing Belt is an ancient artifact that doesn't make any sense. The relic is an exquisite example of ancient Chinese workmanship, yet it contains aluminium, an alloy that wasn't created until the 1820s. How did someone prior to even the Middle Ages make the belt using a technology that didn't exist yet? The belt was found in 1952 during the construction of a middle school in the Jiangsu province. A worker's shovel broke through the earth and into a long-forgotten tomb. The workers poked around a bit and realized they were dealing with something way beyond their pay grade, so they made a call to the experts. Archaeologists showed up and did a full investigation. They found a skeleton along with a number of burial goods. Soon they identified the skeleton as the corporeal remains of Zhou Chu, a general who fought in the 3rd century AD against barbarian invaders. He's one of the biggest heroes of the Jin era, recorded as dying in battle in 297 AD. There were a lot of cool things in the hero's tomb, but the leather belt was the most interesting by far. The leather bits had rotted long ago due to all that pesky oxygen, but there were still fragments, 17 to be exact. They were loosely scattered across the hips of the skeleton, like the Hulk's ripped pants when he turns big and green. At the area where the belt was fastened, scientists at Nanjing University found metallic fragments that were likely part of the buckle. Analysis showed the fragments were made from silver and copper, but mostly it was aluminium. What's the big deal about aluminium anyway? Even though it wasn't officially created until the 1820s, surely someone in the 3rd century could have at least tried to make it, right? Maybe, but it's hard to believe. Aluminium is very tough to make because it requires a bunch of different ingredients and very specific smelting. Aluminium was isolated in the 1820s, but a method of large-scale production still took another half a century. There isn't much more I can tell you about the belt, other than it received many rounds of tests from different Chinese universities. All the tests pointed to aluminium. There are a few theories as to how it happened. It's possible the Chinese understood how to make aluminium, but the knowledge was lost. Eric von Daniken once claimed the Nanjing Belt is proof that ancient aliens visited Earth 2,000 years ago and shared their technological knowledge with early civilizations. What do you think about that theory? Do you think Nibiru will ever be found? And if it is found, will it turn out to be the home of the Anunnaki? Let me know your thoughts and theories in the comments, and thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and come back soon for more awesome videos from the channel.